Hi, I'm Dr. Pam Garcy. I'm a psychologist and a life coach in Dallas, Texas. I've been in practice for 18 years and I've written a few books. And today we're going to go over some stuff from this book, which is called the REBT Super Activity Guide. And REBT stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. And it's a type of therapy that I use with my clients that's a really powerful tool. And so I really am excited to be able to share some big ideas from this type of therapy with you. And the top 10 big ideas are going to be focusing on how to shift out of unhealthy negative emotion and into action. So let me just kind of give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about really briefly, and then we'll go into the top 10 ideas. So first of all, we're going to talk about how we shift out of unhealthy negative emotion and into a healthy negative emotion, an idea that I call taking one step at a time. Then we're going to talk about how important it is to own your own emotional experience, to really take responsibility for that. And the third thing we'll talk about is asking yourself scientific and logical questions, because that's a really cool way that you can quickly shift out of a negative emotion if you just get scientific about your thinking. The fourth idea is going to be cutting out whining, blaming, and complaining. Three things that I sometimes love to do, but it's not good for me. So I've cut it out, and I'm going to encourage you all to do the same. The fifth thing is going to be striving to prefer, accept, and allow reality rather than demanding that it be different. I'll go into that more. The sixth thing will be about developing high frustration tolerance. Then we'll talk about balancing self-interest and social interest, developing your sense of humor. The last two things are doing it now and cutting out procrastination. And then the very last thing is committing to a vital absorbing interest. So I hope you enjoy these 10 ideas. And I do want to say one thing about REBT that I really like about it is that what's satisfying to me as a therapist and a coach is when I hear people starting to use it, the change in their thinking and the change in their language. And I also really love that I get emails from people all the time that say things like, oh my God, just learning this one concept has changed my life. And so I really feel like this information is so helpful just in terms of having a happier, more satisfying life. And I just feel so grateful to Entheos for letting me present it to you and share it with you. All right, so let's get started. So the first big idea is to take one step at a time. And I think that some therapies and some coaching methods will say, all right, you feel negatively, think positively, and now you just have to feel positively. And this is supposed to poof, happen. But really, the thing is that if we try to make these gigantic leaps sometimes, it just leaves us feeling frustrated. And it's not actually very respectful of our own experience. We don't even validate our own experience that we're having. So I think that if we can take a moment and look at what REBT says about this, we will find that it's really helpful. So one of the things that it talks about is that we have negative emotions that are in two categories: unhealthy negative emotions and healthy negative emotions. It's okay to have healthy negative emotions. Healthy negative emotions don't shut us down. They don't make us less productive. They don't necessarily lead to self-destruction. They're just signals. They're just feedback, and we can use healthy negative emotions. Unhealthy negative emotions, on the other hand, shut us down, and they make us unproductive, and they don't allow us to reach our goals as easily. So just to give you some examples, I have this little whiteboard, and I'll move it as we go through it. But every healthy negative emotion has an unhealthy counterpart. So if we start off here, here's the healthy negative emotion: sadness. And sadness usually happens when we've experienced a loss or when something's missing in our lives. So it's okay to feel sad. It's a signal that we need to take care of ourselves. But sometimes there's a difference in thinking. And instead of just being sad, we add self-downing in. So we put ourselves down. Or we add this thing that is called the negative cognitive triad in, which is a negative view of yourself, a negative view of other people, and a negative view of the future. And that can lead to depression, which is an unhealthy negative emotion. Depression can really shut us down, can lead to all sorts of negative effects in our lives. So we want to stay in the realm of sadness, or if we are depressed, attack the thoughts that lead to depression, like self-downing or that negative cognitive triad, and move ourselves back into sadness. Then another example is the difference between the healthy negative emotion of irritation and annoyance and the unhealthy one, which is anger and rage. In between that, there's a thought process going on, which is, there we go, shoulds on life and shoulds on others. So when we say something like, life should be different, or this other person should treat me differently, then we go from just being irritated with what's going on to being angry. An example is like road rage. If we have a person who's driving in front of us who's like really slow, or they're doing some silly things like cutting people off, or even reckless things, it can lead us to get really irritated with that person. And that's a normal thing to feel, and those things signal that we need to take an action to either protect ourselves or be more careful, drive carefully around that other driver. But what happens for some people is they start putting shoulds on the other driver, so they'll start feeling really angry, and they may even go into rage, like that driver shouldn't drive like that, and I'm going to teach that driver needs to learn a lesson, and they'll go into rage, which is an unhealthy negative emotion. So if you're going into anger and rage, you want to shift it into irritation and annoyance. Another one is guilt and shame, is the unhealthy version of remorse and regret, and that involves putting shoulds on yourself. So it's okay to feel remorse and regret. It teaches us that, hey, maybe I could behave better the next time around. But when we put shoulds on ourselves, then we go into guilt or shame. And those usually are shut down emotions and don't usually help us. In fact, they make us hide and not even get help when we might need help. And then one last example is the difference between worry, anxiety, fear, and panic, which are unhealthy negative emotions, versus just concern. Concern doesn't really usually feel great, like, wow, I'm really kind of concerned about that. But it doesn't shut us down. It helps us think about what's going on, and it helps us be active and problem solve. So when we're going into worry, anxiety, fear, and panic, what's happening is we're asking a lot of what if questions. And sometimes we don't even answer the what if questions. We're just like, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we think that maybe somehow we're doing a good thing by worrying. Sometimes we worry because we think it's going to prevent the bad thing from happening, but that by itself isn't going to really prevent anything. When we're in that place of worry, we can even start having really helpless imagery, thinking of ourselves as unable to cope, unable to problem solve. And also we might even go into catastrophizing and awfulizing. So we think this is the worst thing that's ever going to ever happen if this thing happens. And it can really get us tense and tight and shut down our coping. So thanks for tolerating my makeshift visual aid here. But so that back to what that first point is just taking one step at a time, shifting yourself from an unhealthy negative emotion to a healthy negative emotion. Now for step 2, or the second big idea, is to own the times that you're self-disturbing. Well, I often hear people say, especially like in couples therapy, I will hear couples do this a lot, where they'll blame the other person for their emotional experience. So they'll be like, gosh, he makes me so angry, or she is getting on my nerves, or his behavior really is worrying me. And so they're blaming something outside of themselves for their emotional experience. And in reality, it's really we who cause our own emotions. So when we start to own that, then we can start to realize how we create our own feeling experience, and then we can shift out of it. So that is actually an important big idea, is just to take responsibility, full responsibility for your own emotions, and look at how you're creating your own experience. Now, it's not to say that there aren't some things outside of us that are maybe universally disturbing, but there are people even in these extreme circumstances who are able to think about how they want to respond and what they want to do, what they want to create with their experience, and they don't necessarily choose a self-disturbing or self-defeating experience. So it's good for us to look at those examples and think about, wow, we do have examples of people who've really decided to rise up above their circumstance and to do something that's really inspiring with that. And how did they do that? They took ownership of their own experience, and they created it, what they wanted for their own emotional experience. Okay, number 3 big idea is ask yourself scientific and logical questions. So one thing that I really love about REBT is it really teaches us how to think. And we're not really normally wired to think about our thinking in the way that REBT teaches us to. In fact, Dr. Albert Ellis, who was the founder of REBT, said that we're actually biologically predispositioned to be a bit irrational. And if you look at research on how we make decisions, most of our decisions are made from the basis of emotion. So learning to think about your own thinking is really important if you want to shift out of an emotional experience that you don't like. So how do we do that? We ask questions that scientists would ask in order to change a paradigm. And these are also questions, you might even recognize these questions in terms of what a lawyer might ask in a courtroom, in terms of how do they change people's minds. And they even might be questions that you would ask your best friend if your best friend was beating up on him or herself. So let's look at some of these. One of these categories is called empirical disputation. Sounds fancy, but it's basically just asking, what is the evidence for my idea? What's the evidence against it? And really making a list of those evidence. So in terms of pieces of evidence, sometimes our evidence really isn't evidence. Sometimes it's just an opinion. And when we put pen to paper, we'll see it's just an opinion, and then it's not very good evidence. And then other times, the evidence against our idea is really high. So I had a person the other day who said, I don't have any social skills. And I said, well, let's look at that. What's your evidence for that idea? And the person said, well, I don't think I have that many friends. And I said, okay, so is not having friends evidence of a lack of social skills, not having as many as you want? And well, it might be, but it might not be. So we don't really know if that's really good evidence, right? And then we asked other questions like, what else could be leading to this? And what evidence do you have against it? Do you know how to make eye contact? Do you know how to listen? Do you know how to not interrupt? Do you ask questions in conversations? And as I was asking these questions, we just generated a list of social skills that this person had, and we realized the person does have social skills. So another type of question that you can ask yourself, besides the empirical disputation of your idea, is you can also ask the logical disputation of your idea. So is your idea logical? Does it make sense? Does it follow from its premise? And a question that I like to ask to get into that logic of my idea is just a very simple just because question. So for example, I'm trying to think of a really good case to illustrate this with. So one example would be the woman says that her husband doesn't love her anymore. And I'm saying, well, why are you saying that? And she says, well, he never calls me on his way home from work anymore. So I said, so we used a logical disputation on that idea that he doesn't love her. And it's just because he doesn't call you, does that mean he doesn't love you? And really, there's no logic to support that. Just because a person isn't calling doesn't mean that love is lost. It might be a variety of reasons. And another way to tap into the logic is to look at if there are any other alternatives that are applicable, or even maybe more applicable. So, okay, well, let's see why he's not calling you. Well, maybe it's because he doesn't like, picking up the phone while he's driving, and he's told you that. And so that's actually the alternative that's more plausible and fits even better. A last question that you can ask in terms of asking yourself scientific and logical questions is it helping? It's called the pragmatic disputation. Is it helping? Is it practical? Is it useful? Is it helping me to reach my goal? And if it is, well, then that's good. You can keep it, as long as it's also, logical and you have evidence for your idea. Then you can go ahead and keep it if it's helping too. In fact, we know that an idea is useful if you have evidence for it, if it's logical, and it is helping you reach your goal. So one of the things you can do is people will sometimes say, well, it does help me to be down on myself. It does help me to beat myself up because it motivates me. Well, one of the things I like to do is I like to ask people before I ever go into the disputation part is like, what's the effect of you holding on to this idea? And usually people will talk about how it shuts them down, how it makes their lives hard, how things aren't working in their life. And so when we go into the disputation and I ask them, so is this helping? And they're like, yeah, it's helping. I'll say, but just a minute ago, you told me that your life isn't working, that things aren't going well, that you feel terrible, that this shuts you down. So is it really working? And sometimes people are really surprised that the things that they're using to criticize themselves aren't really helping them. All right, so big idea number 4. Cut out whining, blaming, and complaining. Bad habits. What happens when you whine is you're focusing on your problem. You're focusing repeatedly on the situation, and then you're blaming the problem for creating your emotion. You're forgetting your own role in your feelings, and you just keep reasserting these unhelpful ideas over and over without really doing anything about it. Then what makes matters worse is normally when people whine and blame and complain, they go to somebody else who they think will reinforce their ideas. So we know which friends are going to be tough on us, and we know which friends are going to be easy on us. And we tend to go to the ones who are going to be easy on us when we feel like whining, blaming, and complaining. And they reinforce those ideas that are just bringing us down. So Dr. Ellis said we re-indoctrinate ourselves with our irrational beliefs. And that's kind of what's going on there. If you eliminate that option, if you say, all right, I'm going to cut that out. So what would you replace it with? You could replace it with a couple of empowering questions. One empowering question that I like is, what helpful action can I take here? That gets you right into action, and it gets you out of the whining mode. Another one is, what attitude changes will I make? Like, how do I really want to feel about this situation, and what can I do to start creating that for myself? All right, 5th idea here is strive to prefer, accept, and allow reality rather than demanding it be different. So many theorists and philosophers talk about this idea, and I love that Dr. Ellis included it in his theories with REBT. He had a wonderful quote that he would say, which is, demandingness will almost always get you less. And demandingness is when we are demanding that things be different than they are. We demand that we're different than we are. We demand that others are different than they are. And we demand that life is different than it is. We want life to be easy and hassle-free and no problems, But if we look at reality, sometimes we have hassles, and sometimes things are difficult, and sometimes life is hard. Sometimes other people are disappointing in their behavior, or even more than disappointing. And sometimes we are very often imperfect, and we make mistakes, and we even have problems, So when we demand that things be different than they are, all it does is it creates more emotional distress. So if I say to myself, I have to be different than I am, I'm just going to feel guilty or ashamed about how I am showing up. Instead, I would want to go into preferring. Preferring is a whole different way of approaching it. It accepts reality, and it just says what we want. So I accept that I am how I am, and I don't necessarily like this one behavior or another behavior, but I would prefer to act this way. So we can still want what we want. We just don't go into a demanding philosophy with it, and that helps us to feel a lot more easy about it and to flow into a new behavior a lot more easily. So let me tell you some examples of some demands that people make. So if we make I already gave you an example of a demand on the self. A demand on another person might be, you must love me. And Dr. Ellis called that the dire need for love. And there are some good videos on that on YouTube. Another one is that life must be easier. I had a client recently who had been diagnosed with a medical condition, and she was very, very unhappy about that, and she was in demand. She was in a demanding philosophy, and she was saying, it shouldn't be this way, this shouldn't happen to me, I take such good care of myself, like, why is this going on? And it was really she was just really stuck in anger. But the anger doesn't really help the body to heal that much. We want to get out of that as soon as possible. Understandable that she was going through that phase, and it's okay to let her have that, but when she was ready to shift, it was really important to move from that demandingness into preferring. So, you know, it's too bad that things are as they are, but they are as they are, and I would prefer for things to be different. Now, how can I start to create that reality of things being different? How can I keep working on that? When we go into acceptance, sometimes people think that acceptance means that you're resigning, that you're giving up. Other times people think that acceptance means that you like what is. So it's hard to really talk about acceptance if you think, or to encourage someone to be accepting, if you're believing that acceptance means resignation or liking what is. That's not what we mean by acceptance at this point. What we really mean when we're talking about acceptance with REBT is that we realize that what is, and we take what is as reality, and we try not to argue with reality, and instead we put our effort and energy into improving what is. But it doesn't mean that we accept that, that we are resigned to letting things be as they are, or that we like what is. It just means that we recognize that what is. All right, number 6 big idea is to develop high frustration tolerance. So when we're basically biological beings. So whenever a biological organism is blocked from reaching a goal, then what happens is that organism experiences frustration. And what's really interesting is frustration appears to light up the same areas in the brain as pain centers do. So when you're in pain, you're lighting up some of the same areas in the brain that frustration would. So frustration doesn't feel very good, but frustration is a necessary part of growth. If you think about the baby learning to crawl, and they see their toy is just off in the distance, they are going to have to figure out a way to get to that toy. They want that toy. And in that process of learning to crawl, they may experience frustration. If they gave up as soon as they experienced frustration, then they wouldn't learn to crawl. They would just give up and not get the toy. But fortunately, we can experience high frustration tolerance, and we can move toward that toy, so to speak, and teach ourselves how to crawl. So what in life as adults, what happens is that when we experience frustration, sometimes we have low frustration tolerance and we just give up too easily. But REBT encourages us to have high frustration tolerance and to persist, to think of our long-range happiness rather than short-term relief. So also, I use this a lot with people when I'm working with them on substance abuse recovery, because they feel very frustrated at times by life, and then they want that instant relief, so they go toward a substance to kind of numb out on the negative emotions. And if we can work on long-range hedonism, which is this idea of eat, drink, short-range hedonism is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we will die. But long-range hedonism is really about looking at the long-range fulfillment that you can create in your life. And if we can get people who are abusing a substance to realize that that may give you the short-range fulfillment, but it's really not giving you that long-range fulfillment. In fact, it's probably leading to long-range despair for you. So you might want to think about whether you really want to keep doing that. Sometimes people will be encouraged enough to start learning how to give up their addiction, and they will start working on developing that high frustration tolerance. And as I said, high frustration tolerance leads to growth. So when they do that, they also grow their coping skills. All right, number 7 big idea is balance self-interest and social interest. So sometimes people will basically give themselves fully to another person and devote their lives to another person, and they burn themselves out. In fact, in my field, that's one of the things that we focus on a lot, is self-care. How do you take care of yourself? Because if you give yourself fully to this other person, you're going to, or to all your clients, you're going to burn out. So what we want to do is to create a balance of being interested in yourself and interested in other people. Also, you may be on the other end of things. You may just be interested in yourself and not interested in others. And that's also not necessarily in your best interest, because you're usually a part of a greater social community. So it's good for you to have some interest in what goes on in that community, and to do what you can to contribute to the community doing well as contributing to yourself doing well. All right, number 8 big idea is develop your sense of humor. Dr. Ellis was really big on this, and he even developed some humorous songs that he would use to make fun of ideas that get us in the dumps. And in fact, he even made fun of his own theory. He had a song called Perfect Rationality, making fun of how people, once they learn REBT, they want to just like do it perfectly, and then they get mad at themselves for not doing REBT perfectly. But anyway, it's really good to just sometimes take a step back from your situation and look at how funny some of it is. There are techniques such as laughter yoga that emphasize learning to laugh, but you don't necessarily have to go do laughter yoga. You can go watch a comedian, or you can watch something funny on TV, or you can read some satire, or whatever makes you laugh, or just have a conversation with someone that's funny, and teach yourself to not be so serious about some of these things that you disturb yourself over. Number 9 big idea is do it now. Cut out procrastination. So while sometimes we do really need to put some things off, like we do have to prioritize and say, well, you know, it really is more important for me to do this first and then do this. That's one thing. But I'm talking about procrastination where you know that there's something important you need to do and you just keep putting it off. Procrastination goes along with low frustration tolerance. We're usually procrastinating on that thing that feels sort of uncomfortable to do. You know, like, I don't really want to clean my desk because I'm going to have to sort through all those papers, and then I have to file them, and then, you know, I'll have recycling, and then there's bills to follow up on, and oh, that doesn't feel good to do. I'll just do it tomorrow. So we all know what procrastination is, I think. But what we want to do is have high frustration tolerance again and get into the habit of doing things now. As you modulate your day and you realize, okay, I have time for this task right now, I can either procrastinate or not procrastinate, start making the choice to not procrastinate and just experiment with it. Just see what happens. Sometimes as you stop procrastinating, you'll start to feel better. You realize, wow, you know, I made that task into this big thing, and it's really actually this big. It's not that big. And when we get started on it, we start to feel a lot better. And then sometimes it's also just a question of getting started on it, just taking 5 minutes and saying, okay, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes on it, that's it. And sometimes that's all you'll want to spend on it, but at least you can feel like you're making progress. But other times, as you do the first 5 minutes, you gain momentum and you really start to get the task done. And think back to a time when you did that, where you really got something done and how relieved you felt at the end. And see if you can tap back into that emotion of relief that you felt in that time and translate it onto this task and say, hey, you know, I'm going to probably feel that same kind of relief at the end of this. So I'm going to give that to myself. And that will help you to get into healthy emotion and into positive action. Then the 10th big idea is commit to a vital, absorbing interest. So Dr. Ellis advocated that we find an interest that absorbs us so fully that we just really don't even sometimes notice the time going by, that we're just into it. We just love it and we enjoy it. We would like to talk about it. We would like to engage in it. We would like to learn more about it and get really good at it. And also something that is vital to your well-being is even better if we can find something that's going to promote your well-being for that vital absorbing interest. Once we get dedicated to that, we experience things like what Cecil Mahali calls flow, where we just are in that zone, you know, and things just go so easily. So think about what you like. What do you like to read about? What do you like to write about? What do you practice? What do you enjoy? And see if you can put that into your life even more. Think about what you would like to get better at and why you would like to get better at it. What's really behind that? What do you love about it? And allow yourself to start engaging in more of that, especially if it's a vital interest that promotes your well-being. So that is the 10th idea, and of course it's by no means exhaustive. This is such a full-bodied theory and way of, you know, working on your own emotional experience and experiencing life, but I hope I've whet your appetite and gotten you more interested in it. And I really want to thank you if you've stuck with me so far. This is the first class I've taught here, and so it's exciting for me to have that experience, and I'm really glad that you joined me, and I'll be coming back for more classes, so I hope you'll join me again. If you'd like to learn more about the kind of work I do, you can come to my website, which is myinnerguide.com. So like you have a guide inside of you, your inner guide, myinnerguide.com. And I have some teleseminars of different people I've interviewed who are experts in this. And hopefully you can take advantage of listening to those, or free teleseminars and some other free resources on there. And of course, if you're interested in reading more about that, my book is called the REBT Super Activity Guide, and it gives you different activities that you can do to really bring these philosophies down to earth for you. So thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next time.